Hey now, everybody. Hey now, we are live, and we are the Council of Tolkien. Say hi, guys.
Hi, welcome to the show.
Video died. Hello, everybody. Hi, this
Whoa.
is
Oh,
Sid.
you're right. The video did die. Let me fix that. It was there a second ago. Give me a second. I think I can fix that. It was fine until I went live. Let me try switching scenes for a moment. Okay, that's a problem. The video died. You're right. And I'm getting the echo again. We can't win today. There it goes.
Matt and I put on our rings. Now we're back.
It works now. I don't know what I did. I didn't do anything. I didn't touch anything, and now the video's back. Wait, I think I know why. Let me test something.
We took off our rings.
Oh, that. See? But I would have seen the background. I think there's something greater going on there. You guys have like a Tom Bombadil situation going on here. Because I don't think the ring can do that.
Oh, who knows?
All right, let me just do some quick promotion while we set up. I'm not using the intro screen because I didn't have the chance to add you guys to it. And oh, that's the problem with the cross promotion, huh? I'll have to do it on my phone. All right, let me fumble around and get my phone. Where is my phone? There it is. Okay, we can fix this. I'm going to do the promotion on my phone real quick. All right. So, guys, gentlemen, behold. We had a very successful first meeting, I would say. It was a lot of fun. We got a lot of great feedback. We had the chat was interested. We got a lot of followers in the next 24 to 36 hours from the video going live to general public. I did gain like 50 subscribers in that period of time.
I did put another article out today on Quora.
I didn't see that because I only spent a brief period on Quora. I answered what I needed to answer, and then I got off of there because I was just very, very extremely busy today. Okay.
But it was another question about anybody on Quora who might be publishing or anything. It was a different take on the question, but
yeah,
it was read by a bunch of people.
Okay, that's great. And let me just go ahead and post on social media real quick. If I can find my social media browser. Here we are. Okay. So, well, Facebook's being slow, as usual. But yes, welcome to the Council of Tolkien, everybody. So it's going to be pretty much the same format. The only difference is that we don't have to go into such long intros for ourselves this time, because most of you would know us. Hey, Moogle. And those of you that don't, we will have a brief intro. All right, we got Twitter. We got Facebook. Okay, good to know. That's why I should have used the intro screen, but that's okay. All right, we'll figure it out. So, the first thing that I want to get to today, guys, is just addressing some of the comments that we got from the first episode of the Council of Tolkien. So I'm going to bring it up on my phone here, and the video itself went up the same night to members of the YouTube channel, because members always get videos about a week early, and then the full video went up on the 1st. So I'm going to bring up my YouTube Studio app here, and I'm going to bring up the comments, and I'm not going to read every single comment, but I'm going to read the ones that I'd like us to speak about and to answer. Before I even get to the comments posted on YouTube, big shout out to Laurel Callahan, who did not get to attend last month's meeting, but did tell us that she watched the video and that she was big into it, and she really, really appreciated the kind words that we had for her. So I wanted to put that out there because we all spoke rather highly of Laurel. Okay. I see you left a comment, Matt. I got a comment from Matt. Okay, it's not loading the entire thing. Let me just use the regular YouTube app. And the only big difference with the format is going to be that the order that we're going in, because Matt's going to go first, and then myself, and then Sid, and we're just going to kind of try to change it up each time to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be first, which could be enviable, or everybody also gets a chance to be last, which could also be enviable in a different sort of way. All right.
Last is a place of honor.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about going last is you see what everybody else has done, and you could sort of tailor it, you know. Okay, so one comment that I got from Francois Cordon said that the show was amazing, and they thank us for it, and that they followed me and Sid on Quora for a very long time and enjoy our content, and that Matt is new to them, but they are also now following Matt. And Sid is walking away. Oh, he's closing the door. Okay. Did you hear that, Sid?
Yes, I did. And just to say, to find Matt on Quora, look up Lore Master.
Yeah. When we did our introductions last time, Matt forgot to say that he was Lore Master. I drew it out of him later by saying, by the way, he's Lore Master on there. And there are links in the description, so that's how he found Matt on Quora, because there are, in the description of every video, there are links to myself, to the Grey Havens, to Sid Kem, to Lore Master. Arthur...
Lore Master being one... Lore Master being one word with no space.
Yes, there's no space in Lore Master. There is a Lore Master with 2 words, and they copied his bio and his icon and everything, and I don't know how you're going to get rid of that, but that's been a problem. Arthur here actually said that he wanted to hear more from Matt. So hopefully we can hear more from Matt today. Zephyr Optional. Here's a comment from Zephyr Optional, who has a comment about Balrog wings. We spoke about Balrogs and wings when we discussed about topics that we're sort of tired about hearing about. And Zephyr says, Balrog wings are a metaphor for his shadow creeping across a groin-vaulted ceiling, which is exactly what Tolkien described, that there was this vaulted ceiling and that the shadow was billowing out. And if you think of the groin-vaulted ceiling and the shape that a shadow would take in filling that up, it would look like wings. So an excellent comment there from Zephyr. Francis said, they use a timestamp. Thankfully, I looked at what the timestamp was because people on YouTube can type in timestamps to refer to a specific part of the video that they are reacting to. And it was just that I love what Sid says at, and then there's the timestamp. Thank you for this reminder, Sid. It was the comment about how you know that Tolkien's mythology is mythology, but that you live as if it were true.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Yes. Hope we all do that more and more.
Okay. Oh, that's Matt. Now, here's an interesting thing, because we talked about last week, hey, Sarah, we talked about the possibility, this was something that Sid brought up, of whether or not elves had red hair. And Evangelos Pasiopoulos, and there was a whole discussion that came from this comment, asked whether or not Feanor's sons may have had red hair. And there was a discussion that pointed out that there were absolutely red-headed elves. From the History of Middle-earth, Volume 12, the twins Amrod and Amras were both described as red hair. And Mathros was also called Rusundal, which means copper top. So I think that we could put that discussion to bed. They may not have been common, but there were definitely elves that had red hair. And Matan as well. Matan was also one of the only bearded elves out there, and he had a red hair and a red beard. Let's see. Somebody wanted to know if we could barbecue the Balrog wings.
That's going to taste terrible.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what Sid said.
I would smoke them.
You would, well, that, I mean, when you hear barbecue, a lot of people think of grilling. But when I hear barbecue, that means the top is closed and it's all smoking, right? And one more comment that I'm going to bring up, because we talked about whether or not hobbits would wear shoes ever. And Zephyr here says that although Tolkien described them as never wearing boots except for Sturs occasionally wearing them, when Tolkien drew or painted Bilbo Baggins, he always had boots on, which personally I think was that his figure drawing was rather primitive. He was very fond of drawing pastoral scenes and landscapes, but not so great at drawing people. So I think he just didn't want to draw bare feet.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on any of those comments, gentlemen?
My thoughts on Balrog wings is not. It's modified from simply saying it was just a shadow. There are two passages back to back in the Lord of the Rings, and often cited is the second one related to these shadows. But the first one, I'm sorry, the second one is more clear. So the first is the author, Tolkien, saying that there is something like a shadow that's created like wings as it stretches out from the body. And the second one, as he approaches a more clear open area, if you look at the two passages, it's much more clear that there were wings of some sort. We already agreed.
That would be clear if that's what he wrote, but it's not.
It's not. Yes, it is. The exact phrase in the book is wings of shadow.
No, that is not the exact phrase. And I'm getting the echo, Sid.
Only when I'm holding down my space bar, I'll say bye-bye.
Okay. Let me bring it up, because this is something that we can never seem to put to bed fully, and I don't think we ever will, because this is something that Tolkien scholars have been discussing for 70 years, and we'll be discussing it for the next 70 years, and that's just how it works.
I don't think so.
And
you don't need to do
Sid
that.
is going somewhere.
My point is that there are some sort of wings. There's two passages. One is
I'm reading it right now. I have it.
I know. Let me finish my point, and then you can read it out loud to everybody. The second one is more clear. You'll see the second one is more clear as Tolkien reveals what he's seeing, and then all have agreed already that these are not actual physical wings where they fly, and that Balrogs do not fly.
Okay, so, we're not talking about. We're not discussing whether or not they fly. We're discussing whether or not he used the term wings of shadow, and that it does not become more clear in the second passage. That doesn't make any sense. What it says is...
Go ahead, read it.
Okay, hold on. You got to let me talk. Because I'm trying to find the exact paragraph here. Let's see. I'll just read the whole passage. The dark fire streaming with fire raced toward them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir rose his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died, as suddenly as flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. Over the bridge, cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly! Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground side by side behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to lead their leader and face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. That was the phrase. The shadow about it reached out. Not that it was coming out of his body, that there was a shadow around it, and then it spread like wings. Now we'll get to the second part. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came out from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small, and altogether alone, grey and bent, like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. So, what I'm saying here is that what we have here is a metaphor, obviously, of, or a simile, because he uses the word as. It does not become more clear in the second passage. I don't know where that's coming from.
Let me finish my thought then. Because it says that he stepped forward into the opening next to the bridge, and it directly says, word for word, its wings were spread from wall to wall. But that's a much more clear statement than the first one.
It's not a clear statement. It's that we've already established that there isn't literal wings, because it said the shadow about it spread out like two vast wings. I don't think that there's clarity being offered there. It's just simplifying.
My clarity is that it's not actual wings like a bird, nor is it bat wings. The second passage is in quotes. Its wings. Not like wings. It says its wings were spread then from wall to wall. End quote.
Once you have,
so that means there's some kind of wings protruding.
But the shadow spread.
It's not metaphorical.
It is metaphorical, because it said the shadow spread like wings. Once you've established a metaphor, you don't need to repeat the simile over and over again. You don't need to say like wings the second time.
I don't think that it was a metaphor. I think that he was describing something he was seeing from the reader's eye and making it kind of cloaked about not being able to read it, so the reader could imagine that it wasn't totally clear. Then when he stepped toward the bridge and came into the clear, then Tolkien's language choices get very, very clear at that point.
Okay, the one thing
wings were then spread from wall to wall.
There is only one thing, and my friend June is in the chat asking how Bible study is going. There is only one thing that I'm having a difficulty with what you're saying, which is where you keep saying that he stepped forward. The first passage is he's already forward. He's already in his full glory. They're describing what he looks like. And that he steps forward, and his shadow, the shadow that's around him, because there's shadow and there's flame, and the shadow spreads out like wings. He doesn't step forward after this. Gandalf makes his speech, and the most important part of his speech is that he is a wielder of the flame of Anor, which is basically saying, my flame is greater than your flame. You're a creature of fire, and so am I. Mine is like the sun. Mine is holy. You're not going to burn me. I'm going to burn you. And the Balrog reacts by dimming its fire and expanding its shadow. So it isn't so much that it stepped forward and that they were able to see him better, was that it was reacting to something that Gandalf said.
Well, yes, but it also says that he stepped toward the bridge.
Earlier, it said that.
It's more. Just let's look at the one paragraph, and this time give me a chance, if you don't mind, to tell you how I see it. The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. Now, what I'm seeing here is, let's remember the various things we know about shadow as an actual real thing that comes out of Mordor. It's not just the clouds, the material clouds coming up from Mount Doom. The nine Nazgul, as they appear when they attack the Shire, have the same capacity to be shadow. They are shadow wrapped up in cloak and sitting on horses. So I believe that dark undead spirits and you'll are actually have an expression as shadow, and you will find that if Gandalf says this to Frodo when Frodo awakens uh, in Elrond's house, that there is a darkness that an entire dark world, in fact, that Frodo half lives in when he puts the ring on. And in that world, shadow is a manifestation that is very real. And in the somewhere in the book of extra material that was published shortly after Tolkien's death and before the Silmarillion,
Unfinished Tales.
The title, Unfinished Tales. In Unfinished Tales, Tolkien describes how the nine, traveled through the land as shadows, wrapped in robes, and so I think shadow is a spiritual material reality out of Mordor that
yes.
And I think that the Balrog are beings in part made of shadow itself.
Well, that's absolutely correct. There we go. That's absolutely correct, because they are described as specifically shadow and flame. There's two portions to them. There's shadow and there's flame. And when Gandalf boasts, he basically makes this boastful remark about his own flame being akin to the sun itself. I think the Balrog, which is an intelligent creature, it is brethren to Gandalf himself. They are of the same order. Thought to itself, this guy's for real, but how can he deal with shadow? And so it drew itself up, and it made itself appear much larger. Tolkien said that, and I know me and Matt have discussed this greatly, that it's difficult to discern the size and shape of a Balrog. It's easy for me and Matt to discern it, because it's in a lot of the other materials it says that they were twice the height of a man, and there's a lot of stuff in the Silmarillion that points to their height. But to a casual observer, they're vague. They're man-shaped, but they're very vague and hazy, and you can't quite... It's almost like you can't comprehend them. And I think that, and I'm going to be talking about narrative voice today, actually. You can't always trust the narrative voice. And it's going to be one of our topics of discussion. And hello there, Wafru Burger is in the chat saying that they finally get to catch one of these live.
Oh, okay. Well, let me touch on a couple of things you've said. I tend to lean not a false compromise, but a way of phrasing this. There is an apparition of wings that's not metaphorical. There's an apparition that seems to be coming out of or exuding out of these creatures. They do not use them for flight. I think all three of us agree with that. In fact, I think the whole group of the 9 agree with that. And
they definitely don't fly.
They definitely don't fly. We agree with all that. But I think apparition is definitely probably the best definition for this.
I don't think that's the correct word, because that suggests, I think Sid was closer, that they are physical. It is part of them. It is them. They are the shadow and the flame.
Okay. Well, if it's physical and they're wing-ish, then there's something there that comes out of them. If it's an apparition, you want to find a new word, that's fine. I would love to have a new word for this.
Manifestation was the word that Sid used, and I think that's correct.
Fine with me. That's fine with me. But we have to remember one thing here. Two things we're really forgetting. And it is that we also know that the Balrog was physical. Gandalf describes him in author narrative, as first-person description that he was solid and slimy when he was not flame.
And I'm glad you said that, because it's they could be stabbed. That's how Glorfindel killed the Balrog. They were physical. And I want to bring up something. This is the wings thing, and this is the biggest thing, and it just came to me. This is just one Balrog, and I think that they shapeshift, and I think that their shadows could take many manifestations. Nothing in the Silmarillion suggests that any of them have wings like that. I think that what the comment, because this is what we're replying to as a comment, was true, is that in filling it up, in trying to appear large and filling up the chamber and looking at the shape of the chamber, filled up, it's going to appear like wings. That doesn't mean that the Balrog shadow, if it was outside, would look like wings. It's never described in the Silmarillion like that. It's only described in this one instance in the Bridge of Khazad-dûm.
I would agree with that totally until the second passage made it not only reinforced by duplicating, but by being a little bit more clear.
I think
the last
that
thing I'll say about this,
it's made it less clear because we're having this discussion.
I don't think it's making it less clear at all. I think it's making it really clear.
The
last thing I'll say real quick is physically they're holding axes and using weapons that are physical.
Only one of them had an axe.
Right, but they have swords and whips.
Yeah.
One of them wore a helmet that was Gothmog.
No.
And the point I'm trying to make here with all this physical discussion is I think it was Gothmog.
No, it was the Balrog that Glorfindel killed on the
on the mountainside. Yeah, right.
Gothmog was drowned.
The point is that all of this is like four canon passages that demonstrate these are physical beings.
Well, we never said they weren't physical.
It's important, John, because you guys just got done saying that this is more apparition and they're just shadows and flame. Sid
said a whole thing about how the shadow is a real physical thing. That it is that is them.
Well, I'm not saying there isn't an apparition or a shadow thing going on here.
Wait, let's
Sid saying that underlying the actual being, there is a physical being under that, all of that actually casts this type of effect. So we can't dismiss the physicality of it.
But nobody is dismissing the physicality. You're the one that used the word apparition.
It was my attempt.
To get a little close to the occult, in darkness, there are physical apparitions. A ghost is immaterial in the sense of not being solid, but is an actual apparition. And so if ghosts can carry weapons as the undead
certainly do, yeah.
And the Balrog, I believe, is a manifestation of shadow with the apparition, not just appearance. Mm-hmm. An apparition is a real thing, not made of ordinary matter, like a ghost.
And I want to draw our attention to something from the chat, but first I want to back up what Sid said, is that in one of his letters, Tolkien said that one's mind need not boggle at the thought of Sauron in spirit form carrying the ring from Numenor to Middle-earth. That just because he's a spirit doesn't mean he isn't physical. Now, one of our chatters here asked a question about Balrogs specifically. Were whips a common weapon for Balrogs? And yes, they all had swords and they all had whips except for Gothmog. He carried an axe and a whip. And we've discussed about why would they have whips? Because they are implements of pain, they are implements of torture, certainly, and they are cruel. The Balrogs are very cruel. Just read what they did to was it? Which one was it that they stomped him into dust? Was that Ecthelion or?
It was.
There was one of the. It wasn't Turgon because he was in the tower and the dragons pulled it down. There was one of the very important elves that they just stomped him into dust.
It wasn't Feanor.
No, because it was in Gondolin.
Yeah, no, the name is escaping me.
Yeah, the way that they described it was that they trod through his blood. They were playing in his remains, and I'm just trying to think of who died in Gondolin, and I think it may have been It certainly wasn't Tuor, because he lived. And it certainly wasn't Glorfindel, because he was killed slightly after that. Ecthelion drowned in the fountain. So I don't remember which elf it was, but there was an important elf. It may have been the prince who was killed by Gothmog, and then they all just sort of like ran through him. So whips are associated with cruelty, but also like me and Matt have a pet theory that the whips were also specifically made to be a little bit more long range because of Ungoliant, because she fled from the whips of the Balrogs after almost devouring Morgoth. And that's pretty telling.
Going back to our discussion of elements from last time, whips are associated with fire. We can talk about whips of flame, and the shape and motion are similar, and the ability to reach farther than most weapons is an element that comes up with arrows and spears and whips. And if you think about, imagine people who had never encountered any of those, and they're in a melee, and all of a sudden they get hit out of nowhere. That is a quality of lightning strikes. It's a quality of fire. So I think that Tolkien, in his imagination of Balrogs, is talking about their power to cast their power beyond the ordinary weapon range, increasing the terror they carry.
And also whips are speed. The very sound of a whip cracking is breaking the sound barrier. And Matt and me had a conversation like about a year ago about how fast the Balrogs actually are to have arrived in Lambeth so quickly. They have to travel at close to the speed of sound themselves. So another question that really was asked was, and this just came in through the chat, is what do they actually look like? Do they look like stereotypical demons with horns and tails and such? No, they look like they're vaguely human-shaped. The idea of them being grotesque like that came from drawings in the 1960s and 70s by the Hildebrandt brothers, and then that was copied in the Ralph Bakshi film and the Peter Jackson film and everything, and Dungeons and Dragons. They called them Balrons, but yeah, it's a fun design, but no, it's not accurate.
Let's go back to the issue about whips.
Quickly, because we have to get to our regular content.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say
we could talk like this all night.
Yeah. Well, the theory on whips is real simple. I think it's kind of simple that Morgoth needed to have his bodyguard capable of dealing with really the only thing he was actually really afraid of, and that was
Ungoliant. Absolutely.
That was Ungoliant.
Yeah, and he was afraid of her.
And the length of the whips, these are not normal whips. They're really weird because the descriptions of whips in a couple of passages, including Lord of the Rings, indicate that these whips are about 30 to 40 feet long. In fact, Sid and I did a calculation that it would probably be about 40 feet long, including 5-foot arm reach. And those are not like tormenting type whips where you would flog somebody. These are whips that are really designed to reach out and really bind or hurt people. And that's supported by the passages that show that these whips were used offensively at great distance in other passages besides the Lord of the Rings. Yes. And so why would you have whips standard issue that long if you weren't trying to make sure you couldn't get inside of like the leg span, the leg width of Ungoliant, who we think was probably as large in body size, not counting the legs, as Morgoth. But these are some of the cursory ideas about why we think that. That's a bigger discussion.
I think
it's a lot bigger discussion.
I think that you're right. The whips wouldn't just be for just a little torture, because, I mean, that's not their function. I'm sure that he had Sauron for that. Sauron was the torturer. But they were cruel, was the point that I was getting at. It's not like a sword where you cut somebody's head off and they're gone, they're dead. These whips, if you get hit by one of them, you're not only going to die, but it is going to be incredibly painful.
There's one more thing in all of this. The whips are pretty much unique to the Balrogs, and so is the fact that they are all as similar as they are. And my belief is that there was a collection of Maya, of light or fire, before they fell, who were in Morgoth's closest train in the Song of the Ainu. They were his close chorus, and they had almost no opportunity not to fall when he fell, and they fell at the moment that he played his own song, and they were so close to him, they fell to him. And therefore they were like in form because they were like in the origin of their fall, and they were also the opposite of Arion, who did not fall.
And Arion is
always.
You gotta let go when
you gotta like.
Arion is always, in my opinion, she's not a Balrog, but she's so similar to them that when people say, "Well, there are any good Balrogs?" we say, "Well, no. By definition, a Balrog is evil." But the closest thing to what the idea of what is a Balrog, if they were good, would be Arion, who is described as fiery and radiant, but beautiful, so beautiful that it's painful to look at her. Only Tilion was able to gaze on her normally. Okay, so we could go back and forth a lot with this. Here's a question that just came in. Did Morgoth talk secretly to Angband when in Valinor, or did he get lucky Balrogs were nearby? Well, he wasn't in Valinor when he did that. He was in a place called Lammoth, which means echo. They had already crossed the Helcaraxa, and they were in Middle-earth. It still was a great distance, and he let out a powerful scream, and a sound that could reach from Lammoth to Angband is basically a shockwave, and Tolkien described that the earth was rent by this, that it sent out a shockwave. Mountains crumbled, and they came from out of the depths and passed over Hithlum. But we have to get to our regular content. Now, Matt, you're going to be going first. You're gonna intro what you're gonna speak. Well, not what you're only gonna speak about, but what you want us to discuss for the next half hour. I'm gonna give you like a minute or two to intro it, and then we'll start our timer.
Shoot, I mean, those questions just kind of threw me off a little bit because there's a couple of them that really need more time.
I will obviously, yes, but we'll try. Like I said, we'll try to address more of the questions in chat when we can. But let's get to what you have a question or something that you're going to bring to us now.
Oh, the one I had on my list here was the size and power and tactics of the Numenoreans from all the data that we can gather. A lot of it's evidentiary and comparative, and there's a lot of passages that describe the size of this army and how big they were, especially when they landed for what I call the Mordor expedition in Second Age 3260. And I wanted to talk about that just to kind of get a sense on what people might be interested in, and what us three here think about things that I'm proposing or the thoughts. So that's my introduction for that.
Okay, so we're going to start the timer there. So my quick thought is that the Numenorean army had to be pretty vast. I mean, even the Numenorean remnant that left after the Akalabeth, somebody asked me once, well, how many of them were there? And I said, well, enough to fill up 9 ships. And these Numenorean ships were not small. And then when we talk about the fleet that went to with Ar-Pharazôn to Valinor, that they blackened the sea, and they were able to completely encircle Tol Eressëa. That was just their naval unit. That wasn't the entirety of Numenor. There were a lot of them that were not there. So massive army.
I think to give some sense of it, let's take a look at the Lord of the Rings and then think backwards from there. We know that in orders of magnitude, all of the armies of the free peoples of Middle Earth were numbered at best in the low 10,000s. Well, in the War of the Ring, if you went back to earlier to the dates of Osgiliath, it may have been the high 10,000s, but probably not pushing 100,000. But we know that when whichever king it was who went to the gates of Mordor in the Second Age, and Sauron looked at it and basically said, "Oh crap, there are a lot more of them than there are of my folks."
Or did you mean Third Age?
Third Age? No, I'm thinking no. I'm going back now to early Second Age when right before they took Sauron prisoner because he surrendered.
Okay.
He surrendered because he had some tens of thousands, and he saw this vast army of Numenor and said, "I can't win by fighting."
I don't think he wanted to fight.
Oh, I read very clearly that if his army had been big enough, he would have. And that's what he then did in the Third Age. He had hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if we include the Easterlings and the Southrons and everyone, against a mere 10, 20, 30,000. He came back with overwhelming force because he really liked it when he was running all of our Pharazôn, that was just a slip of the tongue.
Yeah.
Our Pharazôn's army that he enslaved mentally on the order. I think that was on the order of hundreds of thousands.
The one thing that obviously I think Sauron would have loved to have won, but I think that he knew that if he did win, that doesn't get rid of Numenor. That doesn't erase their culture. They still exist. I think it was advantageous of him to go to Numenor, and that the best and easiest way to go there would be as a prisoner.
I'm going to stick my nose in a book while I'm listening to you guys.
The reason I've got some calculations on this is that in 3260, the Numenorean fleet was described as 1,000 isles in harbor, and since that's our only evidence that Tolkien would give us, 1,000 seems to be a good place to start. We know that his
if we're going to get into the numbers game, I'm going to take a nap.
I know. Well, this is the question. The question is how you guys are talking about how big it is, and he drew the Droman-style ships. Some of them were larger the closer that we got to the huge invasion of Valinor. But if there's 1,000, the Droman ships held about 200 men. About 100 of them were seamen and oarsmen, and the other 100 were soldiers. So, by quick calculations, we're looking at the Numenorean invasion in Second Age of in 3260 as being probably about 100,000 landed Numenorean soldiers. That's back then that was unmanageable, because there's other evidence that tells us that the kill ratios were 9-1, 10-1. So this is why Sauron gave up, and this is why his leaders, as it's recorded in the Silmarillion, his leaders at the time, by the way, were the Nazgul. That's a clear fact. That they reported, leaders reported to him.
I know you're right, but can we stop saying that's a clear fact?
Well, it's the passages say that his leaders...
but I just don't like that phrase.
Okay. Well, maybe it wasn't the Nazgul, but the Nazgul were over everybody for these...
No, I agree with you. I just... I think that we have to leave it open to some interpretation here, don't you think?
Let's just say the leadership echelon that probably included the Nazgul.
Yeah. What's interesting though, because
when they report back that the army is so large that it's I don't remember the exact term, but
it blacked out the sea.
Well, right, but it was another term related to it was beyond their ability to manage, or something like that.
Yeah.
That's when Sauron decided he was just going to go, meet them in person without any escort or entourage. I mean, that's got to be one of the biggest armies that any of the evil forces have ever seen, and said, this is not something we're even going to even approach. I mean, that's pretty amazing by itself.
It is. But I think that, I question Sauron's motivations. I think he he goaded them into coming there. I think that he was playing on the king's pride and the king's arrogance, that not only was he able to come to Middle-earth and win, but win without losing a single man or a single drop of blood spilled or a single sword drawn. And I think that that's the reason that Numenor fell, because the king thought he was so amazing. Like, at this point, put yourself in the position of the king who defeated or forced Sauron to surrender, or at least you think you forced him to surrender. What do you do then? Would you really be so arrogant as to actually bring him to Numenor and then put him in your councils and become his friend and let him build a temple? It's sort of wild that, if Numenor had kept with their faith, that Sauron would have been handed over to the elves, and of course he knew that wouldn't happen, because he wouldn't allow that to happen. If there was any chance that he would be sent to the Undying Lands, Sid.
I think everything too.
I'm trying to finish a thought, and you're pressing the button, so I'm getting an echo. If there was any chance of him actually being brought to the Undying Lands and being put in Mandos, he's gone. Poof. You don't no more sight. He's gonna disappear. Okay, go ahead, Sid.
Yeah. Really, two thoughts, but I'm going to start with the passage that I was referring to. So, Ar-Pharazôn comes to the gates of Mordor, and Sauron looks out. And Sauron came. Even from his mighty tower of Barad-dûr, he came and made no offer of battle. And this is the key point I was alluding to before. For he perceived that the power and majesty of the kings of the sea surpassed all rumor of them, so that he could not trust even the greatest of his servants to withstand them. And he saw not his time yet to work his will with the Dunedain. And he was crafty, well skilled to gain what he would by subtlety, when force might not avail. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. And John, I agree basically with what you're saying, but let's remember the power of Sauron's voice, even greater than the power of Saruman's. Mm-hmm. And so he said, my army just ain't big enough. And my voice is. And so I believe he was taken prisoner. And the other point is, John, Ar-Pharazôn had already turned very dark before he showed up.
The entire nation had gone down the tubes. You got to take your finger.
Yeah, I'm still trying to speak. So yes, the entire nation had started to go down the tubes, but they were not yet openly worshiping Morgoth and Sauron combined, and by human sacrifice, which is what Sauron, with the power of his voice, led them to. So he took Sauron, willingly became a prisoner and surrendered, knowing that the power of his voice would dominate an already tainted people. And it's an interesting reverse story of Joseph in Egypt in the Bible, where his righteousness and truthfulness turned him from a prisoner to a slave to the king's chief mentor.
Okay.
And it's the power of it.
Yeah. My issue is the motivation, like I explained, and it's interesting because this is what I'm going to be talking about, is the narrative voice when I get to my section, is that the author of that section, and I'm not talking about J.R.R. Tolkien, I'm talking about whoever was the chronicler there, which that's probably Elrond in that case. They're putting thoughts to Sauron. It's sort of the same thing when he surrendered himself to Eonwa after the War of Wrath, and they said that everybody thought that he was completely sincere. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but none of the elves that write these chronicles that are written as the Quintus Silmarillion and translated by Bilbo and then retranslated by Tolkien, they don't know what Sauron's thinking. They don't know that he thought, wow, there's too many guys there, you know. That was, I think, their assumption, and I think that it was always his plan to get to Numenor. And by getting them to bring such a vast army like that, it is a colossal show of pride. Because Pharazôn's kind of putting all his eggs in one basket. If they perish, if Sauron's too much for them, it's going to take Numenor thousands of years to recover from that.
Well, we know from the passages that he was very tall. We know he carried the ring with him because he didn't leave it in Barad-dûr. It's the passages say he didn't go outside of his fortress without it, so that indicates that he had it with him. And there's other passages that describe his presence and countenance as being equally disturbing and equally fair, and people couldn't decide which one it was. He probably smoothed his tongue, that's for sure, and had a plan, that's for sure. I personally, in my research of it, think that he normally would have fought them because just 20 years prior he did try to fight them and he was wiped out. So this isn't happening in a vacuum. He was wiped out his forces were caught between a force of probably 10 to 15,000 elves and probably another 10 to 15,000 Numenoreans, and nobody came back. They were completely wiped out by this group. And so then when 3260 comes along, he sees 100,000 of Numenoreans, just Numenoreans this time. I think there's more evidence to suggest that the gig was up. I mean, there's no way he was going to field an army that was going to take those kind of casualties and maintain themselves as some kind of viable force, even if they would have won, and they wouldn't have won against that many Numenoreans. But I think at that point is when he changed his tactic. I think he was like, look, there's no point in having my armies destroyed like this. I'm just going to use this new tactic. And it worked, and nobody could resist him because of who he was and who our Pharazôn was at that time as well. So there was a little bit of a harmony of events there.
Sauron was never a very good war leader, if you think about it.
I radically disagree.
Well, what did he do in war that was so great?
Let's pick up in the third. I mean, well, first of all, I believe that he had Ar-Pharazôn attack the Undying Lands exactly to destroy Ar-Pharazôn. I don't think he was arrogant or stupid enough to think that he could the Valar. So if his goal was to destroy the Numenorean navy, he did. It was a sneak tactic, but it was great. Well, let me go on.
He didn't do that through war.
Yeah, he not war against them, but war sending the troops to death, which is still a military technique. But let's go on to the Third Age. So he lost big time. His giant army with Ar-Pharazôn is gone. And before that, he lost under numbers. And what does he learn and do in the Third Age? He's reduced both sides of the alliance. The Elvish armies are gone. The Numenor is gone. The Numenorean kingdoms in Middle-earth are weak and are assaulted. And in a combination of war and plague, Sauron won, or if I get the number of years wrong, tell me, 3,000 years. He waged a slow, brutal war, always with superior forces. And if he didn't have superior forces, then he or the Witch King of Angmar brought dread plagues, say that 3 times fast, brought dread plagues and undead that mortals could barely face or rarely face. And so he was victorious in war until the point where he had an army of hundreds of thousands against an army of about, as I said, 20 to 30,000. And it looked like he could conquer all, except that darn pesky ring fell into the volcano at the end.
So, Third Age Sauron did not win for thousands of years. He wasn't even active for thousands of years. He was almost completely silent after his loss at the end of the Second Age. And Sid, I'm sorry, I have to. Could you stop eating on camera? It's. I know people don't like that. I just have to point it out. You remember that he was hiding as a necromancer in the forest for most of that time. He didn't return to Mordor until after Gandalf and Saruman and the rest of them drove him out. And then it was 10 years after that he declared himself openly. And that's when the War of the Ring started. So the Third Age was mostly Sauron less. They were at war with the Wain Riders. They were at war with the Corsairs of Umbar. They were at war with the Dunlendings, and they were at war with the Easterlings, but they were not at war with Sauron for thousands of years.
Well, I want to add something here. I think both of you had some good points, and there were some times in the First Age, and obviously the end of the Second Age. I mean, wiping out that many Numenoreans is something that was able to achieve those kind of numbers. But John's right about one sense. The Third Age was very, very split and very divided as far as his presence were concerned. But we should talk about a little bit more of the comparison between Sauron and Morgoth. Morgoth never led one single army in the field at any point.
He was a
coward.
It
was really left to his Balrogs. That's right. It was left to his Balrogs and to Sauron. So Sauron was his lieutenant for a reason. It wasn't just because he was a good old boy from back home being a Maiar, because the Balrogs were also Maiar. But I believe that there was some mixed results and some great successes. Sauron either directed, led, maneuvered, chessboard, whatever you want to call it. Some of it was political. It was successful. And then there was other times where he was missing the boat. Not because he was necessarily dumb or tricked, although there were a couple times, but because his enemies, the forces of good, actually had some other things squarely put together, and he simply yes. just lost. But I think that's more of a fair way to look at it all the way around.
I wanna jump off of what you said, because you're completely correct, and I think that I want Sid also to comment on this, because I think that this is a morality thing here. Is that in Tolkien's work, the villains, your Morgoths, Saurons, Saruman too. Pharazôn is a bit of an exception here, but they lead from behind. They let the armies do it from there. They're very rarely coming out in war. When Sauron does come out in war, he always loses. He doesn't do well. He's not actually good at fighting. He lost to Elendil and Gil-galad, and he only came out to fight them because he had endured such a long siege. Whereas the kings of men and elves are always in the front line. They're the brave ones. They're the ones who they won't put their armies are not in front of them. Their armies are behind them. And that's kind of why they win, because that's a very romantic view of war. And I think that Tolkien wanted to show that the villains are always hiding in towers or in pits, while the kings that are the good kings are out there actually fighting.
Absolutely. And I want to say that the key element here is courage versus actually being, in Morgoth's case, certainly, and I think Sauron also, being made of fear once he fell. And his weapon was fear, but his weakness was also fear. And he essentially fell into his own fear and darkness. And similar with Sauron. The other thing is that there's some interesting thoughts about the nature of magic. You get a tiny hint of it in Galadriel saying to Frodo, we don't understand, you use the same word for what we do and for the deceits of the enemy. What is magic in the positive sense? I think it represents two things still extant in our own world. One is creativity, and the other is heroic leadership. we not only creativity in the sense of writing everything to the legendary, but also creativity in the sense of being a wise leader who creates a healthy people, a healthy village, a healthy shire, a healthy nation. And magic represents that quality, the good kind of magic, because of its heroism. And actually, if you look at most of the leaders who were recorded among the hobbits of the Shire, they also took the lead. Mm-hmm. Sam, Merry, and Pippin, who went on to be the three leaders of the Shire for the next half century at least, led the hobbits to be victorious over the remains of Sharky. And so he's very much saying, and Aragorn, of course, embodies leadership rising out of the shadows to set all things right. And that is, in Tolkien's world, I think, an expression of what is also called good magic. And its essence is heroism in us mortals and non-fear in spiritual beings, as we see in Gandalf against the Balrog, to get back where we started.
I have a question to pose to you guys, the both of you. I'm curious what you both think. And how do we feel about Pharazôn here? Because he is at the forefront. He led the army. He didn't have his army behind him. Or in front of him. He had his army behind him when he went to Mordor, and even when he went to Valinor. He was so arrogant that he thought he could fight the Valar, or claim their land at least, and he wasn't hiding in the ships. He wasn't like, okay, go ahead, do it. And it's sort of like an interesting way, I think, that Tolkien has of saying that he's evil, he's small evil, he's not big evil.
I would put it, you're on to something. I would put it slightly differently. He was beguiled evil. The fall of the Numenorean kings in general, that culminated in our Pharazôn, was, and Tolkien speaks about this in a wonderful recording I've heard. The Valar made a mistake in placing mortals on Numenor too close, not just physically, but also in terms of communication, to the immortal lands of Aman. So their envy of immortality grew to, we deserve immortality, which is a profound arrogance. And in that lineage, our Pharazôn came, and his personal arrogance could be beguiled by Sauron very easily. So he's a vast and powerful figure, but he is deeply, deeply deluded in a way perhaps even that Sauron is not.
Even the way that
other being.
Even the way that he took the throne was very questionable. Matt, I want your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, he's conflicted, and
like, he's not a good person.
He's not a good person. He doesn't have any powers that we can really sense from any of the passages about him. He seems to be an usurper. He takes over the throne from the rightful queen by forcing her to marry him, and that's how he gains the throne. It's the typical love story from the 9th century.
Yep.
And so, he's pathetic, and I would just say that the question about Sauron being brave or not, I think he was afraid of Morgoth. He was, after he lost in Tol and Garhoth, he did not want to go back and face the music with Morgoth. The passages are very clear that he was not part of the War of Wrath.
He would have been humiliated.
He did not go back. He was humiliated. What happened in Tol and Garhoth when he lost control of that fortress to Luthien, and then failed to defeat Huan because he turned himself into a werewolf, which indicates, on the other hand, that he wasn't bashful. He was actually kind of brave. I mean, he was brave to the fact because he had hubris to try to pull it off.
He was trying to,
but I would
find a loophole there.
he was trying to fulfill a prophecy that he was the greatest werewolf, because that's how Sauron thought about everything.
Arrogance,
So he couldn't, arrogance. He couldn't help himself. But the last thing I'll just point out about Sauron was, when he was trapped and he was forced to break the siege and all that, but he did walk into battle on his own without being chanted by his troops to do it, and all that pressure that Morgoth felt when, Fingolfin rapped on his doors. But he did come down, and he did kill Elendil and Gilgalad within, would count, maybe 10 or 15 seconds of each other. That's no small feat. Two guys are very difficult to have killed, got a hold of and killed. And so I think, there's some cases where Sauron is able to bring it and swing it.
I think he's definitely not cowardly like Morgoth is. I just don't think he's really that great at fighting. He always loses. The only battle that we know that he took place in that he was completely victorious was against Finrod, which was not a physical battle. It was a magical battle. That's what he was good at. And I always tell people on Quora that Finrod should have known better. He should have challenged him to arms rather than magic.
Yeah. So, I think the case is mixed. And as far as concluding this section, if we're getting close,
we have 2 minutes.
Idea that, so concluding this section, I would say that, the Numenorean army, when there's passages that say that the sun's blotted out by one single Numenorean archer volley, even if we take that as some kind of hyperbole, we have a lot of other passages that said the Numenorean army was extraordinarily heavy in archery and steel bows on top of that. So these guys were killing people before the orcs or anybody else could even get to their front lines. So they were big trouble.
And it also goes to the whole diminishment that they were so much bigger than the armies of the Third Age, and then you go back to the First Age, and then you have some really, really big armies. So everything gets worse over time. Sid, you got about a minute left. You want to say anything on this topic?
When you first mentioned size, I was thinking of physical size of individuals, and just a quick
That's what
question.
I thought.
But within a minute, Matt, how tall was Aragorn, and how tall was Aragorn in comparison to both, say, Elros all the way back, and then the kings of Numenor, as they lived in the first, say, 5 generations and descended from there?
Elros was half he was half elven and chose to be human.
He is twin.
First age.
He is a twin of Elrond, so you're just Elrond size.
Yeah, he's a twin. Right. And so he was a twin, but these guys back then were they were large. When you're talking about more than 2 Rangar, which is a term of measurement that Tolkien uses, this means elves are somewhere around the 7 foot to maybe 7'4.5" kind of range ish, and the Numenoreans were very, very tall because of that kind of lineage, and they were the early men. Aragorn, is 33 generations removed and has a lot of mingling of blood of men that were left in Middle Earth that weren't totally Numenorean, although he is Numenorean blood himself. The best estimates that I've seen that I'd put my money to was he was probably around 6'6", and Elrond was probably pretty close to that as well.
Okay, so that's our time there. Let's just move on to the next thing. I don't have anything to add to that anyway, and we are out of time for that section. So I'm going to go next, and I want to talk about the narrative voice. And this came up a lot when I was reading The Hobbit a few weeks ago, and I'm going to be returning to Twitch to do more of The Hobbit, of course, because we only got through a few chapters. But we learned from Unfinished Tales and the story of the Quest for Erebor that what Bilbo wrote is not what actually happened. And it was mostly in relation to Thorin and the way that Thorin behaved in Bag End. And Gandalf sort of was like thinking, is it that he was oblivious, or was he changing things because of, Thorin becoming his friend later? We know that what he wrote about Gollum was not the way that Gollum really was. Then we come to learn that Bilbo was theatrical and whatnot. There was these poems that he wrote that were based off of tales told to him of the First Age in Rivendell that he didn't really believe, that he didn't at the time thought it was all just fairy stories, and then he wrote his own versions. And there's a few other things that I'm going to touch on, so I'm going to start the timer here. I just want to let you guys know what we're talking about. So Bilbo is an unreliable narrator, and I think that once you realize that, with the Hobbit being the first published Middle-earth book, that we cannot necessarily always rely on what the narrator says as being true. I'm not going to relitigate the Balrog wings thing, but one passage, and this is what inspired me to talk about this, from The Lord of the Rings, is very early on, when it is Frodo and Sam and Pippin. And they had not met with Merry yet. And they were traveling through the forest, and it was before they met Gildor. They were sleeping on the side of the road. And according to the narrative voice, a fox comes up to them and sniffs at them. And then we're privy to the thoughts of the fox. That the fox thought to itself how strange it is for 3 hobbits to be sleeping on the side of the road in this part of the land, and it's sort of an ominous thing, and the fox is worried, and then it sort of toddles off, and we never hear anything like that again. Now, who wrote that? Did Frodo write that? And if Frodo wrote that, why did Frodo write that? Where did he get the idea? He was sleeping. So was Sam and so was Pippin. Did Gildor tell them something that he heard from a fox? I don't think so. That would have been mentioned in there, I think. So I think that obviously that didn't happen. And it's just a storytelling flair, because Frodo, when he started writing, was writing in Bilbo's style, or his interpretation of Bilbo's style. Another one that came up from The Hobbit is, and I talked about this on Quora recently, Bilbo goes to steal from the trolls, and he tries to pickpocket them, and he's caught because one of the trolls has a magic talking purse that says, "Who are you?" And that gets him caught. And we never hear anything after that about magic talking purses. It's so bizarre and doesn't fit in with what we know of Middle-earth, and the way that magic works and the way that everything works. And I think that Bilbo was embarrassed that he got caught and put in some sort of device that he could blame it on. So do you guys have any examples that you can think of the narrative voice not being completely trustworthy?
Oh, yeah. But I want to, yes, real quick, I would just say that I am very troubled by the Red Book of West March overlay. I fight just not liking it, and I fight against it as what actually is Tolkien narrative, because of your point you just made. I think John, you and I like agree like almost all the time, which is meaning, and Sid as well, which means we see things the same, and that's a great strength of our group, because there's no deviation really. This type of passage related to the fox thinking is a window into Tolkien's mind as the narrator, and there's no way that's not the narrator. The whole idea that every single thing comes from Frodo and Bilbo in the Red Book of West March, everything, always, including the Silmarillion, Adventures of Tom Bombadil. I'm talking about the Legendarium. I'm not talking about Lord of the Rings. I completely reject it. I completely reject it. I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's constructive. I don't think it's valuable in any way at all. I think there's a lot of things that are definitely Tolkien first, what I call author narrative. The nine uses this idea of type and veracity. This Fox thing that you just mentioned is, in my opinion, a type one author narrative with a not zero not bad veracity, but it's a veracity at mark of zero, which means it's not modifying the type at all. It means it's author narrative and very high veracity. That's about as close as you get to direct narrative outside of there was Eru, and he set Ea into the void so that it would not be void. You know, that kind of stuff does not come from Bilbo and Frodo smoking a pipe and eating a dead fish.
Yeah.
It's not where it's
Tolkien had this idea near his death that the history of the world of Arda was the same as the history of our world, that the earth was not created in the fashion that it was in the Silmarillion, and that this was all Elvish or Numenorean legend. And that it was basically that we're reading their, for lack of a better word, religion, but the reality is what, while Tolkien would point to the Bible most likely. Sid, do you have any thoughts about unreliable narration? You have to press the button, Sid. Not hearing you. What has happened? All right, he's going to figure it out eventually.
Well, if you can hear me, you can just butt in when you're ready, Sid. So I'll just finish another point just to keep this moving forward. There's the other one that really drives me nuts, which kind of started a lot of the ideas I had about forming our group, which was a peer review writer consortium, which is the Council of Elrond, is absolutely fraught with author intended ignorance, inflected unsurety for the characters that are in the Council of Elrond. The readers, however, have much more information. I know this sounds weird. We have much more information about how much of this is true or not because we have access to all of the other writings, Tolkien's letters. We have so much that we can actually look at. And when you look at the Council of Elrond talking about, especially Tom Bombadil, they don't have really a clue or a grasp of him at all. And I find so much of that to be, very low type of narrative, very low veracity. What a drunk orc thinks about Gandalf is, also very low type, low veracity type. There's two different things there. There's the type of person speaking, and then there's the credibility of the person speaking, either in the story or whatever. And those two functions together really make whether or not you have a credible canon source. And I don't think very many people understand that, because what they'll do, and then I'll close off and see if Sid can jump in, is what people will do is they will often cite a character said this and therefore it's canon. And technically they're right. It's canon because it was in the book. But it doesn't have any reliable type or veracity to it. That's the problem. Just because it said, someone says it doesn't mean anything as far as its actual factual nature to it. Mm-hmm. And I make huge distinctions between that, and so is our group, about what is actually hard canon and how much of this is just, it was in the book, but it doesn't mean it's actually really the case because of so many different factors that we just talked about.
Sid, Matt, we got to give. Okay, we got to see if Sid, are we? Yeah. We're not hearing you.
No, he's not.
Should we get the beacons lit here?
Maybe he should reboot.
No, you got to stop suggesting that. We're in the middle of a live broadcast. You can't reboot.
Well, I don't mean the broadcast. I mean his feed.
No, I don't know. Sid, is it possible that you could... he obviously hears us. Get the audio working? Oh, there he goes. That's not what I wanted to happen.
He's He's going to try it himself.
Somebody in the chat said that Sid should use semaphore. Okay, wait. Let's wait for Sid. Don't say anything.
All right. Well.
Oh, because he's going to come in the other chat, and I'm going to have to bring him over, too.
Okay.
All right. Because I'm not talking about the whole type and veracity thing either. That's not all what I'm discussing.
No, I know, not exactly, but it does have an effect related to how much of this is, Hobbit written in the Red Book of Westmarch, and how much of this is in totality Tolkien's writings and works in narrative. That not contradicts, but explains other things that are outside and around the world of just what happens in the Lord of the Rings.
He's not
now,
showing
people like
up.
us.
Like I said, I don't want to continue until Sid comes back. Let me see if I can get him on the phone or something, because he's not coming back. Let's see. Just bear with us, folks. We're a man down here. I'm going to put it on speaker.
Everyone gets to see the background of the technical.
Oh, okay, because you didn't come back right away. I was getting concerned. He's on his way.
Can I hear me?
Okay.
Can I hear me?
What's that? What did he say? That was strange.
I didn't hear him.
It sounded like he was saying, "Can you hear me?"
Can I hear me?
Can I hear me? I think he's in that testing settings thing. I don't know what's going on. Sid? Oh, there he is. Hold on. Bring him into the call. Hey, Sid. Hopefully... Okay, camera's coming on. All right, we have camera. Do we have voice?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, goody.
And there's no echo. Something you did fixed everything.
I put on my magic ring.
You put on the headphones. I think we should stick to that. Oh, and you got your magic ring. Some suspiciously bearded dwarf. Suspiciously bearded elf. Okay, Sid.
As I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Do
you have a thought on this?
Yeah. I want to go back to what Matt was saying, because actually what I think is lovely about this group is we simultaneously agree on a great number of things and also see things profoundly differently. Yes. I actually love the Red Book of Westmarch. I wish I had a copy on my shelf. I only have it in translation. I think it works 99%, which is beyond anything other writer has ever done of this sort. I do agree about the Council of Elrond that you see clearly it was a thought-out stage piece written by Tolkien, with each person having an objection that Gandalf can answer and say, no, we can't do that with the ring. No, we can't do that with the ring. No, Bombadil is no good with the ring at all, etc., etc. And in that sense, Tolkien's intent, if not his voice, does come through in the design of that. And actually the things that you raised, John, are the same things I was thinking of talking about in my section, including specifically the fox. But here's the 1%. Every once in a while, I think it's really absurd to say that we know something and we can make sense of it, rather than saying Tolkien did something really quirky, or even Tolkien kind of screwed up here. And one of the screw up cases, even though Tolkien came up with an excuse for it, I don't buy it. In the diagram of the Doors of Moria, where it says Moria and not Khazad-dûm in Elvish, before
Khazad-dûm fell and got called Moria. Yeah,
Well,
Tolkien tried to patch that up. I don't buy it. I would just take it as an error when he was writing the book.
Are you referring to where he said that's what the elves called it?
Well, the simple fact that the diagram, the drawing in the book,
yes,
contains the word.
No, I get that, but you're saying that he had an explanation for that. What was his explanation?
Matt told me about it about 2 months ago that it was kind of a prodding joke.
Oh, no, actually, I think that might have been me.
Maybe it was.
I think that might have been me.
And I'm not ruling that out, but I think honestly, if you gave Tolkien a couple of beers, he says, "Nah, I just screwed that one up."
There were definitely errors.
Yeah, and I want to go back. The fox speaking was not an error.
Wait, it wasn't speaking. We were privy to its thoughts. That's what bothers me. That's what bothers me.
The fox having thoughts in language.
And that we're privy, because we're not privy to Sam's thoughts. We're not privy to Aragorn's thoughts. Yeah. Why are we privy to an animal's thoughts?
Let's start with the fact that the animal had thoughts.
Yeah.
Because that's profound. Because thinking in words implies Fea, implies the soul, and that is different than just a living animal. I think this is a case where, as Tolkien began to write Lord of the Rings, he had no idea of how different it was going to be from The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. And he let some of his Hobbit narrative voice...
Oh, absolutely.
Came up with a talking purse.
Yeah. Well, that was in The Hobbit, but yeah, and talking... Let me ask you a question, Sid.
Let me just finish my thought. So, I'm saying, in a sense, there's a tiny, tiny bit, less than 1% of sloppy world building in Tolkien. And it's more fun just to see it happen and say Tolkien is human too, than it is to try to come up with workarounds. John, what were you going to ask?
Okay, so, because in The Hobbit, we are privy to a lot of things that Bilbo was not privy to. And the biggest of which was the account of the slaying of the dragon Smaug. Now, obviously, Bilbo's story is partially fiction. The events all actually happened, but we don't know if they happened in that exact way. But Bard slaying the dragon, was he told by a bird? Did a bird come and speak to him and tell him that? Or is that something that Bilbo threw in there because he thought it was cute?
I think we're free to have our own opinions here.
Well, I want your opinion.
But my opinion begins with this. The Hobbit was not written first. It was an oral tale. It was a dad making up stories for his kids. And that voice itself, Tolkien's voice, and the narrator voice he made up while talking to his kids, creates a very different context than what we would say in the Red Book of Westmarch tale idea that came later. And I would simply say that, if you want to take, that was just Tolkien being Tolkien out of it.
Yeah.
You need to say that, as both of you have already said, Bilbo was an imaginative storyteller, including for Hobbit children as his audience. So he kind of mirrors Tolkien in what he's doing.
And out of all the characters that he created, the one character that was the most like him was Bilbo.
In one song, I would also say that Gandalf reflects something absolutely of Tolkien's inner wisdom, because you can't write a Gandalf without having Gandalf's wisdom.
I think that's true. Yeah, but I mean, in personality, though, I think that he's basically Bilbo.
Well, I would say his home personality is Bilbo. His cultural personality.
That's Gandalf.
Is very different.
Yeah.
I'm actually really thinking this through. I'm thinking some new thoughts here. His home personality was Bilbo. His spiritual personality was Gandalf.
A little Faramir, too.
Yeah, and Faramir, a student of Gandalf.
Yeah.
And his he had a quality. One of the 5 values he thought of as absolutely highest in literature that we understand least is escape, and that's where Bombadil comes in. But there's also another element. It's a whole social element. He was a professor at Oxford in a classist society where
wait, we have to stop for a second because I have to address that, Matt, there's some kind of very loud noise coming from your end. Could that possibly be addressed?
Yeah. Just keep going.
Okay. Go ahead, Sid. Sorry.
Okay. Not a problem. So, where was I?
You were talking about the cultural, the spiritual, and the private.
Right. So, yeah, and coming back to the cultural, he was an intellectual, which didn't fit into the basic class structure of the British Empire, which was political military power ruling over common people. And he was outside of that and therefore able to comment on it. And his imagination of all of Middle-earth is about righteous power. And he did not think that the British Empire was a righteous power.
He certainly didn't, and considering his youth in South Africa, I can understand why.
And yet, also, if you look closely at what he says about not just the Shire, but he has a whole long thing about the ritual of giving gifts on your birthday, and calling the various groups in the Shire clans, which is not a word he ever used in the book, and above all, that Samwise Gamgee, it sounds like an honorific name, and he knew it would to his readers. At least he's half wise. No, it doesn't. It means he's a half-wit.
You know, and Aragorn actually addressed that when he said he should have been called, instead of Perhail, which was the Elvish translation of Samwise, it should have been Panhail, which would be full wise.
But what Tolkien had a tremendous disparagement of uneducated folk. It was a split in him. He had tremendous admiration for Sam, and he also kind of thought of Sam vastly below him.
Just a second.
He also thought of Sam as being vastly, and all of the Shire. I mean, Sam was at least halfway towards a decent person, and the Shire. Well, I mean, he admired it in one level, and another level, he utterly disparaged the illiterate nature of the Shire.
Remember, but Sam was literate, though. Sam was literate.
That's what made him half wise.
Yeah, I think
but
that.
He wasn't literate in Elvish.
Well, you know, I mean, very few of them were. I mean, I think that it goes to their naming conventions of the hobbits that you get the girls all get these beautiful flower names like Rose and Lily and Eleanor and Belladonna, and then you got Bilbo, Bungo, Bingo, Pippin, Merry, you know, and Sam is basically called Dummy. And I think that that's interesting that you're attributing it to Tolkien, because if we go by his conceit, and I always try when I write to write in universe. If somebody points out an inconsistency or an error, and that's what we're talking about, are inconsistencies and errors, I don't try to just say the author messed up, because even though if it's true, because he did make mistakes. He said that Gil-galad was a son of Andafer, and he wasn't. He was a son of Andafer. He said he was a son of Fingon. Fingon had no children, and that was actually an error of Christopher's. But I would say, well, Bilbo screwed that up when he translated. He got his notes crossed up, you know. So with hobbits and their names and everything, he's saying he's translating it from Westron to English, and Westron doesn't really have any sort of like analog in universe. When he has the Rohini's language, it's always represented as Old English. But you know, like for example, Frodo is Maura. You know, the names are very, very different. So I think that, you know, it does make sense. You can actually attribute, even in universe, you can attribute that to Tolkien being kind of funky about it and saying, this guy's half educated, I'm going to call him Samwise.
but also playing a game with himself because he also deeply admires Samwise, and it says
Yeah.
wise in there. He knows his readers are going to think better of the people who's writing it than part of him does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that becomes, place. And John, where you and I differ, and again, it's a great difference. I don't go 100%. I go 99%. Let's follow the Red Book of West March and the whole constructed narrative. But when it becomes ridiculous to do so, let's just say Tolkien was a human being, and these are errors that slipped in. But now they're interesting errors.
Now here's one that's not an error.
What happened in Tolkien's creative process that made those errors?
Yeah, well, that's a completely interesting topic. But here's another one, because I really think that hobbits are almost all the sources of this sort of tomfoolery that we see, the buffoonery about thinking foxes and talking purses. You notice it's always connected to the hobbits and their shenanigans, their names. I'm glad you brought up Samwise, and I wasn't even going to talk about this until just now, but the Old Took, right? The oldest hobbit until Bilbo lived to be 131. He lived to be 130 years old. What was his name? Gerontius, from a Latin root that means old. And now you have to think at some point Gerontius was born, and his parents looked at this newborn baby and said, let's call him Old Man.
Actually, I'm gonna straight out correct you on that one out of the letters. Names are given in the Shire, as they are in various cultures on Earth as we know it, at various times. And there, for some people, especially people who were leaders or extraordinary, they are given an honorific name when they become, for example, the leader. They take over.
Yeah. But wasn't his honorific name the Old Took?
Yes, but I think he got that when he became the leader of the Took.
But wasn't his given name was Gerontius?
I don't think so.
I
think that was a back formation.
You think that the genealogies were altered later on?
Yeah, my understanding is the genealogies use the adult names. So if someone had multiple names.
So here's a thought.
They're shortening, like Pippin from
you're on to something. Yeah. What if like I said, I'm going by the conceit that I have that you were just mentioned of going 100% in universe. Tolkien, in his role as translator, he gets the book from Ælfwein, he translates it, and he sees the Hobbit genealogies, and there's all these names, but this one guy doesn't have a name. It just says Old Took, and he translates Old as Gerontius.
That would make a lot of sense.
I feel better about it now.
Yeah, but he was being called, whether he was called the Old Took or there was some specific world, not Took, but just the Old Man.
Yeah.
It was actually a name he was given, but it was given when he
like Sharku.
Exactly. He was given when he started to live it by being older than just about anybody else. Now, I have a question for you, John. I have read elsewhere that the last name of Pippin is pronounced Took. Very specifically, not to. No, Took.
That's what I'm saying. Took.
No, I'm hearing book.
Took.
Okay, we're agreeing now.
Yeah. I say it quickly. Took. Not book. Book. Took. I'm not putting my lips together. Watch. Took.
I hear. I'm not hearing a difference, and I say.
Hold on. I have to put it down. Took. See how I'm not putting my lips together? Book.
No, I'm not talking about the T and the B. I'm talking about the vowel sound.
Oh, well.
I think the vowel sound is more distinctly an ooh than you sometimes say it.
That is what I'm saying. I'm saying took. I think I'm just saying it fast, and that's throwing you off. I'm not doing like what Gandalf does, where he draws a took.
I think sometimes when you say it fast, it kind of falls out to sound too much like book.
It could also be my New York City accent coming out, which has been known to happen at times. Matt, we haven't heard anything in a little while from you. You talked about veracity and all that stuff. I have to come back to you because I added some time, by the way, because of the technical issues we had with Sid. I added 3 minutes to the timer here, so we have 4 minutes left. What do you think about specific incidences that you can look at and say that might have been an embellishment?
Well, Tolkien admits in one of his letters, I want to say it's 211, but that there were poetic exaggerations and hyperbole in a lot of areas. He admits that there are some grandiose things. We covered it last week, but I think the number one
and Calagon
suspect for that is and Calagon for sure. And I think there's a bunch of them, and some of them can be parsed out as being okay. We're not going to be able to figure that out unless there's enough evidence from other passages and other sources that you and I could come up with 6 or 7 other books that will kind of confirm that. And a lot of people online at Quora and elsewhere will say, well, that's not what happened. It's like, well, it is kind of what happened, because there's 3 other passages in 2 other books that describe what this really is. And so we get into that all the time. The only thing I would say, though, about this little topic real quick is, can you remind me, I don't remember where exactly the fox was located. Where was the fox located when it was being discussed? Where was it actually positioned on the map?
It was not that long after they left the Shire. They had not yet reached Buckland. They had not yet met Gildor. So it was pretty early on. Yeah, they were in the Shire.
They left Hobbiton.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure they left... which farthing is Hobbiton in?
That's the West Farthing, I believe.
Yeah. I think they were still in West Farthing.
Yeah, because they struck out south. They had not gotten to Farmer Maggot, for example. It was very shortly after they left.
I think that this story reminds me of how many other things there are out there that are very odd between the West Farthing and the Old Forest.
Well,
there's really weird things that happen.
It's a magical area.
And it's very weird. It's almost like this vortex of weirdness, because, there's dreams, there's voices, there's these thoughts of the foxes, and we also
walking
know
trees.
That there's this weird connection between Tom and Goldberry and the hobbits.
Oh,
and,
I know.
We've written articles about.
Yep.
We've written articles about this, and I
wrote a whole paper about it.
Yeah, there's something up with that, and not something up with it. We know what it is. We all know what it is, but that's the one thing I wanted to point out.
I mean, for me,
the second thing is...
Well, go ahead with your second thing, but I'll respond to that. No, you go ahead.
Real quick is just... sloppy world-building comment. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I do disagree with that.
I think that a more kind way of saying it was that he was as human as anyone and could make errors.
Yes, but my point, though, to this is that Tolkien, among more than anybody else, and I really mean this literally, made 1 million tons of art. And to experts like us, we can go find errors that any other author wouldn't be able to tolerate or stand under any scrutiny over the period of 100 years. In Tolkien's particular case, you can find maybe a little bit more, but the ratio of error per tonnage is very, very, very low.
It's pretty magnificent.
Why it's so incredible.
It's pretty magnificent, and
I
mean, just the fact that we're talking about it is magnificent.
Yeah, there's a couple little oddities. I like some of the ways that things are corrected. Some things were left. If you look at the biographies of Christopher and things, there's big discussions about things that are going to be clarified and modified or whatever. And based on his own discussion with his father, he left them in as that's what he intended to leave in. Yeah. I think sometimes we think there's an error, but it's not.
We're out of
time.
Not
really an error.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. We're out of time. I mean, the only final thought I have to say on that, on this discussion, and then I'll turn it over to you guys for quick final thoughts as well, is when it comes to narration and things like that, Tolkien did say there were inconsistencies in his work. He tried to stamp out as many as he could, but that it would be a great sport for people to find them. But when we get to strangeness like the thinking fox, it was a conscious choice. It was put in there for a reason. We just don't necessarily know what the reason was. Do I think a fox came up to and sniffed them? Maybe. It's how do we know that happened other than there being a voice telling you that it happened? That's what makes it interesting for me. Matt, quick thoughts to end it.
Thank you. I have a very big one to end it with, and that is, I think this is Tolkien's way of saying that animals have Fea. And I believe that this is his nod or his admission that there's a panentheistic sense to beings in the world, that they have some kind of a spirit to them, that if you don't want to call it Fea, capital F, that there's some kind of small f Fea, every inspirited being in Tolkien's world, and that they think. Now, do they think of the word food? No. But do they think that they're hungry? Yes. So okay. The desire, or whatever they think to themselves, is a form of communication and thought that is kind of a word to us. And I think that he's kind of getting at that, and that there's this kind of thing that does happen in animals' minds in the panentheistic sense, not pantheist.
Okay, I know what you're saying.
Panentheistic spiriting.
But we got it. Like,
yeah,
quick,
right. I'm just
quick thoughts. Quick was the operative word
for the audience. The audience, that is something that he's intimating that is there.
Okay, Sid. Quick thoughts.
I'll start by completely agreeing with Matt on that, and
I agree too. I wanted to just put it out there.
It is, the key is that it is something divine. It is something precious. It is something that deserves to be protected. The way Yavanna created the Ents to protect the trees from the axes of the dwarves, and even more, the way that Gandalf said to Denethor, "I too am a steward, and if even one plant should remain alive in all of Middle-earth that can someday bear good fruit, I will not have failed."
I have a feeling we're going to come back to that passage every episode.
As long as I'm on here, we might well.
It's a great passage.
But, yeah, that notion of our stewardship, and thank the audience for pointing that word out last week. I appreciate it. Of, let us love the world as God loves the world. If we put it into Christian terms, as Tolkien might, but chose not to open to more readers. That's really large and profound, and I'll leave my other comments to the beginning of my section, because we actually already overlapped into.
That's why I ended with you there.
Yeah. Well, shall I just keep going? And
no. Actually, I wanted to briefly, especially take a brief respite here to bring up something that came up on YouTube about Pippin, and it's just a comment that I want to bring up. It's not related to any of our specific content here, but you brought up something about, the inclusion of religious themes here, obviously. And I had fielded a question on Quora and included it into my video where it was about, was the Pippin taking the Palantir and looking into it a good thing or a bad thing? And I said that, if we look at the results and everything, it was 100% a good thing. It basically won them the war. And then somebody in the comments pointed out that it's a bad thing that led to a good result. And I don't think that Tolkien necessarily operates in that fashion, because he thinks you can't do good by doing bad. And the person's was saying that basically that, but Pippin was stealing, he was sneaking around, he was doing a bad thing. I said, I think we can forgive him for that. First of all, he's not an adult. He's a boy. And secondly, this ball is like almost as tempting as the One Ring was to some people. These Palantir have driven Denethor mad and driven Saruman mad. And I just want to point out, when I talked about all that, the comment here that this person said, Tolkien's Catholicism was core to his moral compass when creating his legends. It's also fair to say that virtue and morality in pagan and non-Christian stories were just as important. It's also fair to say that Tolkien corrects, my word, many, let's say, issues with Judeo-Christian myths, like women being punished to serve men, death as a punishment, and makes it sparklingly clear that Eru created evil so that he could make evil observe how he makes it good. My opinion, Tolkien's creation myth is a 1,000 times more beautiful than the screwball crime and punishment story found in Genesis. Tolkien's creation myth is also very scientific, suggesting the universe is a sound vibration made physical by the sacred fire of the spirit. And I actually invoked you, Sid, and I mentioned you that you live as if it were true, is something that you said last episode.
So thank you for bringing this up, and I think here there's one piece I would add. What Pippin did, I think, has two qualities, very specific, very subtle. One is evil always fails itself. And there's a turning moment when the small hand, Beren one hand, Frodo the nine-fingered, Pippin the fool of a took.
Fool of a took.
Yes. Thank you. You say it so well. Takes it, and the evil destroys itself and becomes mere error, and then turns to the good. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's a direct intervention of Eru, such as when Bilbo, of all people, picks up the ring in the bottom depths underneath the Misty Mountains. Here, I don't know if the hand of Eru is there. It's arguable it was. Things had just been set up so perfectly that the first stealing was actually Grima Wormtongue grabbing Saruman's baseball and throwing it out the window.
And it didn't even belong to Saruman. It belonged to Aragorn. Right.
In the ultimate rightful.
Yeah.
Well, but no, Saruman had a right to it. It was one of the objects in Orthanc, and he was given stewardship of Orthanc. His error was not in owning it or holding it. His error was in not using it well.
That is true.
Grima steals it, and Pippin picks up stolen goods.
Yep.
Just like he picked up a little rock.
Wait, it rolled. It rolled directly to him, and it's like the One Ring escaping Isildur by design or not design. One last thing before we get to Sid's section, Matt. I wanted to. I told Sid about this earlier. We had the whole elemental discussion last week about the four hobbits, and we couldn't agree on. We agreed on Sam and Frodo, but not on Merry and Pippin. And was Merry water or was he fire? And I actually returned to read a certain section from my YouTube. And when they were in the house of Tom Bombadil, and they had those dreams, Merry dreamed of water. And it's like the first thing that's mentioned, that he dreamed of water encircling him and drowning him and just encompassing him. And I think that's another reason why I would say that Merry is the water one. You're doing the Robert De Niro thing.
I think that's interesting dream. I think it's a debatable point. I just look at more evidence that Pippin is more happy-go-lucky in the middle of the river, just kind of going along with having fun and stealing fruit and vegetables from Farmer Maggot and eating mushrooms.
Hold on. That was Frodo.
I know, but he's really just going with the flow, and I just see more examples of that, and I see more examples of Merry having a little bit of a temper, a little bit of a fire to him.
I mean, I didn't mean to relitigate it. I just thought it was an interesting point that because
I think it's a great passage.
Sid brought up Sam's dream that he slept like a log. Okay, so Sid, we'll give you a minute or so to introduce your topic before I start the timer.
So I'm going to go on two themes because we did half of one already. I was going to talk about the fox, for instance, and these breaks in narration that kind of reveal Tolkien. But you also remind me of another one, and I love this topic in general, which is Bombadil, and even more than Bombadil, Goldberry.
Oh, you know,
And
I
I
like to
also
talk
want to,
about Goldberry.
yeah, and I want to bring up a very specific point that I believe that's kind of quirky, and I genuinely don't know where you guys are going to stand. Tom says very clearly, or no, someone at the Council of Elrond says accurately of Tom that he has set the bounds of his own realm and he will not leave it.
Okay.
And yet, if you go to the poems in the extra book that was published during Tolkien's lifetime, Tom crosses the Brandywine and hangs out with uh, Farmer Maggot. We don't know. I don't think it's the current Farmer Maggot. I think it's an earlier generation of Farmer Maggot. And he goes to the bar with him. And Matt just added, something's going on in with magical creatures in South Farthing.
All right, I'm going to start the timer here.
Okay. So I'm going to propose that Bombadil's realm, I definitely believe that he says that the Great Road is his is his northern border.
We know one boundary for sure, yeah.
Which is the Great Road.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there's not that he includes at least part of the Shire in his territory.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
See, he wouldn't go to Bree.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't go to the Prancing Pony, but he might have gone to the Green Dragon in Bywater.
But he wouldn't step onto the Great Road. So that's like the boundary line we're sure of. But I think that something much greater is going on. What elevated the Shire above all of the other places that hobbits lived over the thousands of years? I think that Bombadil and Goldberry establishing a home in the Old Forest created a spiritual space that just in its own background allowed the hobbits to thrive in the Shire and became the key point of mystical transformation for Frodo when he entered the Old Forest.
I think that's that I think that's true because you read my paper about it. So I don't have a lot to add, but I just want to say that you're right. I mean, I even think that like the Eve of hobbits was a creature much akin to Goldberry. Obviously not Goldberry, but it could have been a sister or just something similar to her. That there was an old Took legend that one of their ancestors married a fairy.
Who knows? Maybe Tom and Goldberry did have a little girl, and
the way that I think of it is, I just imagine some man, perhaps a man of smaller stature than average, just being drawn into the Old Forest and enchanted by a song and meeting a maiden. It might not have been water maiden, a nymph like Goldberry, perhaps more earth, something like a dryad, and marrying her, and their children becoming the first hobbits, the first halflings.
I see another possibility, which is there never was a physical marriage. There was a spiritual, in a sense, union with Goldberry's energy and spirit that uplifted the Took clan. And they interpret it in their minds as being an intermarriage. But again, this is where we get to play. There's so little information, and Tolkien said clearly that he wants every reader to create what works for us as readers, as long as it fits within the framework that he, or the Red Book of Westmarch, if you prefer.
The whole idea of application, the freedom of the reader.
And that is our sub-creation of ourselves as we grow in love and wisdom through acceptance of Lord of the Rings. And I have a fun one with this because we know the term "the free peoples," as far as I know, is never explained. Where did that
he did
term
explain
"free
it.
people" come from?
It was anybody who, because it originally came from anybody who wasn't under Morgoth's thrall, and in Treebeard's poem, he mentions the free peoples. He doesn't have a line for hobbits, but he said, "Here they are first, the free peoples." And in that case, in the way that Treebeard speaks of it, the Ents, the Elves, the Dwarves, I think it refers to free will.
I agree, but then what is going on with the nature of that freedom? And then we have that curious word that Tolkien brings in on fairy stories, escape, which is clearly represented by Bombadil. And what is said of him, Bombadil is master, no one can trap him. So mastery isn't about power over others. And we see Gandalf again and again renouncing any kind of manipulation or control or power over others. And Bombadil just having no interest in it.
Yeah.
And yet, in a humorous way, I see a joke. There was someone who captured Bombadil.
Oh, I always say this to Matt, too. I said, wait a minute, Goldberry got him there.
Exactly. And a question, straight up, do you guys think that the house that Tom Bombadil and Goldberry shared even existed before they got married? What do you guys think?
No, he built that for her. He wouldn't even live in a house if not for her.
Bingo. That's how women capture men in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
He's a wild guy living off the land, going boating, arguing with squirrels, just doing his own thing. He's the perennial bachelor, spirit of the earth. And then she gets her hooks into him, and now he's living in a house, and he's bringing her flowers, and it's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It should be celebrated. We have to hear from Matt, because Matt's being very quiet.
Well, I agree with everything I've heard so far. I had no real injection except to claim some of my own thoughts on this, and that is, he also goes to the Barrow Downs. And he's described by a couple different people who would know, including Goldberry, which I think is a nymph, but I mean a Maya, a lesser Maya.
I think you were right. I think you were right the first time. I think she's a nymph.
It's fine. My point is that either way, she would be a high type, high veracity character witness about what Tom was, and if she says that he's the master of wood, water, and hell. I've always rejected the idea that means that all of a sudden that when he leaves the border of the Old Forest, that all of a sudden he's no longer the master of wood, water, and hell. No. So that's point number one.
Will not and cannot are two different things. I mean, I think that he
might not have a reason to.
He drew his boundaries by choice.
Sure. He can do anything he wants. I mean, if he wants to leave and do something else, because as we saw from the Barrow Downs, there's no characters. Oh, there's very few characters in Middle Earth that can dispel and disperse and dissipate a Barrow Wight with a wave of his hand.
We had already seen what he did to Old Man Willow, so I think that's a very similar thing.
It is, but this particular Barrow Wight was literally wiped out and dissipated and sent away. So that's really serious power. But Gandalf. I love Gandalf, don't get me wrong, but there's something about Gandalf that really is irritating related to the Council of Elrond and in the fact that he says these things, and he hasn't even got into Middle-earth until year 1600 of the Third Age. By then,
1000
has been
1000 was the year that Gandalf arrived.
1000 TA 1000.
1600
by then
was Sauron doing something.
Right. And and then Tom's already been here since before the Dark Lord came into from the outside, capital O outside, which is the void. So he's been here for a long time under the stars when the night was fearless. Those are quotes right out of the Silmarillion. And
those are quotes from the Lord of the Rings.
I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. But about about the time period and the creation of the Silmarillion, and um, I just don't think that the veracity of these guys is high at all. It's very low, actually, about what he is. I do think there's a definite spirit of harmony and balance um, between Goldberry and Tom that is more like what Sid is saying. However, I agree with John very much that that they provided a protective umbrella from the West Farthing all the way to the west, all the way to the Barrow Downs area. This whole area was very, very protected and enchanted. And I think they made that area thrive. And I think they made that area a almost a semi holy place. But here's why it happened.
Wait, hold on. I have to
Tolkien
step in here. I have to step in here. There's two things, Matt. Just hold on to that. There's two things. One is you mentioned a quote that was not exactly correct. You said that Goldberry said that he was the master of the wood and the water and the air. Tom said that. Goldberry, when asked who is Tom, she replied very simply, he is. So I wanted to bring that up. The other thing about, and this goes to what Sid was saying about the area of Arthedain that became the Shire, and this was, we know that Tom was there since, time immemorial. We don't exactly have a time frame for when he met Goldberry. It was probably a long time ago. But
actually, we do.
We do?
Yeah.
When was that then?
A farmer maggot was at his wedding, which means that, and
so it had to have been in the Third Age. Okay.
It had to be rather after 1600 of the Third Age.
Yeah.
The Shire existed.
Yes. Well, obviously. So okay. So that's good. So here's my thought, though. The creation of the Shire, because you talked about this, Sid, about how hobbits lived all over. They lived in Breland. They lived all over Eriador. And then they all, I mean, they didn't only live in Eriador. They lived in the Vales of the Anduin. They lived in Rovanion. They lived all over the place. They were shy of the big people. A lot of people didn't know about them. The men, the Eothia that later became the Rohirrim, they knew something of the halflings. But they all migrated towards Arthedain. They all wound up in this area, and they found the land that would one day become the Shire. And they asked the king of Arthedain, we found this wonderful land that is completely uninhabited. Can we settle there? And he says, yes, go ahead. And then the Breland hobbits go there, and then hobbits start migrating from all over Middle-earth, and they pretty much all wind up there. Some of them go back to the Vales of the Anduin. But here's my question. You have this patch of land that's just south of a major dwarven colony, just east of a major elvish colony, and just west of not a major, but a community of men. How is it uninhabited? How is it undiscovered? We know the king gave them permission, but how is it that nobody found this? Even just trying to go to the Grey Havens to sail to the west, nobody traveled through this land and thought, wow, this would be a nice place to live. Or, I think the only reason that they found it is because of Tom and Goldberry.
Yes, and let's take that even deeper. Were Tom and Goldberry planted there by Eru?
Yes.
Who then created the hobbits, who awakened quite possibly around the time that that Sauron began to rise again in the Third Age, possibly earlier, but definitely because in response to Sauron, they are the leitmotif of the Third Age. And so at key moments, and we know one key moment was Deagol and Smeagol finding the ring. We know another key moment was Bilbo picking up the ring. But I think there are two more key moments. One is when the hobbits found the Shire, that somehow, as beautiful as it was, no one else had ever been interested in. I think that's Tom and Goldberry's influence.
100%.
They're preserving it for those who belong there. In a sense, they're children. And the Hobbit children are their children. And then, as you said, all of the hobbits who were around migrated to this wonderful place Or two other possibilities that we know of. Some probably just, if they didn't like the Shire, they died off because they were hunted down by nasty big people or just starved out. And then one little group that was in the Shire, how peculiar, decided they didn't like the Shire.
Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of stores went all the way back home across the Anduin. And at the time of Smeagol, they were a clan led by Smeagol's grandmother, who happened to be living right where the ring was.
I love that you brought that up. And I'm going to expand on it even, because I have had these discussions with Matt especially, that I view hobbits and their creation, their genesis, and everything about them as being the converse of the orcs. And
I like it.
Yeah. And like the orcs were cold to Mordor, they were cold to the Shire, the hobbits. And it's funny that out of the ones that rejected the Shire, now some of them lived nearby in Bree because they wanted to live with men because they got along with the big people there. And Tolkien described Bree as very wonderful for having such a mixed community that got along very well. But
I think it was the ones who liked their beer and full pints.
Well, they had beer in the Shire as well. But I think half
pints for the standard.
That's true. But you got a point there. But it's interesting that it was still Shire adjacent. The ones that lived in Buckland, that's Shire adjacent. It later became part of the Shire. Westmarch is Shire adjacent.
I want to interject something that it supports what we're talking about. We're not missing it, but I think it's important to add at this point. Shouldn't be surprised that Tolkien has this feeling about this area. He likens the Shire as his home in Oxfordshire.
Oxford. I mean, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, he says very many times that this is his enchanted place, childhood, the place that he loved, the place that really gave him so much of the inspiration.
But
so
how he viewed it, and so
but
you're going in a different direction. Let me finish my orc thought here. So
no, I'm not. I'm going in a direction that supports you, but go ahead.
Well, let me finish my orc thought here, though. Out of the ones that left, the remigrant stores, they didn't care for this lifestyle. They created their own culture. It was very different. And Tolkien doesn't have anything nice to say about any of them. He says that Deagle was mean and greedy, and Smeagol was worse, and that basically the whole community was just sort of not that great. So to be drawn to, Tolkien calls it their point of origin, where they came from, because they were the river people, but also just that it had happened to be where a big chunk of Sauron's power was. I think that that's interesting because it's not that far off from the idea of Tolkien, of Sauron drawing evil creatures to Mordor, or blackening the forest and making it a haven for spiders, and then all of a sudden the very nastiest hobbits all wind up near him. It's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. But go ahead, Matt.
So I agree with all of this. Actually, this is going to be in our book.
100%
ads and sections that are even added even by other members of our team, because it's full. Your article is great, but we've already discovered so much.
It's going to be expanded. My paper is going to be expanded. Yeah.
100%. We've got all ideas to pitch in on this, so it's really beautiful. It's going to be quite a chapter. But the last point about this is that Tolkien himself says how important it is. And for the hobbits who are so central to the Lord of the Rings to be coming out of that same exact place, which is right next to Tom and Goldberry, and Farmer Maggot being at the wedding and everything, Tom has set up shop right there. I'm not sure he was there from the very, very beginning, because it was a wide open place. He can go anywhere he wants. He's decided to settle there for right now. But he can do anything he wants. But it is a very, very special place. And I don't think that hobbits were produced any kind of physical union between them necessarily, but some kind of stunted human form being was left in its raw origin and protected by those two. It's very, very clear that there's this kind of special thing going on there.
There you go with that word again. That phrase. That it's very, very clear. There you go.
It's clear because there's so much evidence to it. I mean, there's a lot of... We just got done spending 30 minutes of talking about passages that show there's more evidence for this than against. So,
yeah. Well, my idea wasn't that a stunted human was cared for by them. I thought that there might have been a man who wandered into that domain who might have been of below average stature that was enticed and wound up staying in with something like Goldberry, not necessarily Goldberry herself.
And let's not confuse the origin of the hobbits with the origin of the Took legend in the Shire.
I think they're connected, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Like Bilbo even said, it's probably hogwash. Sid, I wanted to say something, and oh my god, it just flew out of my head too. It was something specifically to you, Sid, too. Oh, Farmer Maggot being at the Bombadil Goldberry wedding comes from a poem that was probably written by Sam.
I never thought about the authorship.
Yeah.
That doesn't appear.
Because anyway. A lot of the poems, because Bombadil as a character is older than the Lord of the Rings, and a lot of those poems predate the Lord of the Rings. So the idea that there was a character called Farmer Maggot in both of them, they're not necessarily connected. But Tolkien later explained it, that those were poems that were written about Bombadil by Samwise.
Thank you. I did not know that.
I didn't think of it right away till just now.
Yeah. How much time do we have left?
9.5 minutes.
I'd like to start wrapping up with two very specific points. They would be a good closing discussion. And one has to do with Tom, and the only two times we know that he worked magic to make change happen. And we've already referred to both of them several times in this call, but Old Man Willow... Master Mary's being squeezed in a crack, cried Sam. What? Shouted Tom Bombadil, leaping up in the air. Old Man Willow? Not worse than that, eh? That can soon be mended. I know the tune for him. Old Gray Man Willow. I'll freeze his marrow cold if he don't behave himself. I'll sing his roots off. I'll sing a wind up and blow leaf and branch away, Old Man Willow. Now, well, first of all, this voice that is coming out of me to say it also sounds a lot like
You'll get there.
Sounds like the master of the inn in Bree.
Oh, Barlam and Butterbur.
Barlam and Butterbur, yeah.
Oh, the blustering, harried sort of speak like, oh, well, I know,
exactly.
I have so.
But then the difference between what Tom says he's going to do and what he actually does, setting down his lilies carefully on the grass, he ran to the tree. There he saw Mary's feet still sticking out. The rest had already been drawn further inside. Tom put his mouth to the crack and began singing into it in a low voice. They could not catch the words, but evidently Mary was aroused. His legs began to kick. Tom sprang away and, breaking off a hanging branch, smote the side of the willow with it. You let them out again, Old Man Willow. What are you thinking of? You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Bombadil is talking. That's all he does.
Yeah.
He sings him a lullaby.
Mm-hmm. And he gives him a good smack too.
He gives him a smack with his own branch, which is exactly what I was talking about before, with the Palantir ending up in Pippin's hand. Evil defeats itself when it goes too far.
Mm-hmm.
This is the turnaround moment. Next turn.
No, Sid,
By the way,
hold on. No. Sid, your audio cut out briefly, Sid. Just if you could repeat that.
I caught when it did. I had to pick up my hand to turn pages, and I forget what that does.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So now he's called to help once again, and there's the Barrow Wight. Get out, you old wight. Vanish in the sunlight. Shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing out into the barren lands far beyond the mountain.
He's got such a pentameter, too.
Yes. Come never here again. Leave your barrow empty. Lost and forgotten be, darker than the darkness, where the gates stand forever shut, till the world is mended. He's just been cast out of the world like Morgoth.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
That's the only possible game.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I fielded a question recently about what Old Man Willow actually was, and a lot of people just assumed that he's a Huorn, or either he's a Huorn or he's an Ent that has gotten very sleepy, and I think he's something very different. And if you read Return of the Shadow, it was an earlier draft. So there's a caveat to that. Frodo was still called Bingo at this point. Merry was called Marmaduke and such, Pippin was called Odo. So it's an early draft. But in this draft, it said that that Old Man Willow was a malevolent spirit that became trapped in a tree. And I wonder if, in this idea that Tolkien had, was Bombadil the one that trapped him there?
Interesting question. Clear allusion to Shakespeare, The Tempest.
100%, yeah.
Where the witch Caliban's mother was a spirit trapped in a tree by Prospero, who is in some ways a little more erudite, but a Bombadil type.
You see it in Germanic myth as well.
Yeah,
I think
let me tell you why I spoke all about all this. It is the beginning and the end of Frodo's time in the Old Forest. Frodo and the other hobbits are saved both times, and it sandwiches Frodo and the other hobbits' time with Goldberry. And there's something absolutely hilarious in the same half page. Tom says, "No one that walks on two legs is a master of the weather, and this is Goldberry's washing day."
And then she makes it rain.
And she makes it rain and enjoys it because she enjoys the rain. Yeah. And remember that his schedule of getting water lilies is based on her annual needs. So she actually is a weather master, which means she is not something that walks on two legs.
We don't get a lot of her walking around too. She's sitting in the chair surrounded by the pots of water.
Except when she goes out to the garden. I mean, she walks around the house.
Yeah.
Because she comes to them at their bedside and all of that. But she
Well, maybe she has a third leg.
But the only time she goes out doors is in her reign.
Yeah. Which
comes once a year. And so this shows what a deep and phenomenal being she is. And also remember that Tom tells pretty much the entire history of Middle Earth to Frodo over the period of, I think, 3 days. Interesting.
Yeah. Matt has been trying to get something out for a while.
This is my last thought. Yeah. That ties to Jesus and 3 days between death and resurrection. I believe that Frodo was utterly reborn and became a being who could defeat a wight. He went from being a scared kid, not quite kid, but a scared, loopy, nothing guy who liked to read elvish books, who just ran away from Old Man Willow.
He had Bilbo's arc in a very small period of time.
Yeah, to someone who could defeat a wight, and then look at Frodo. It's a microcosm of Frodo's entire journey, and Gandalf comments on that when he wakes up in the house of Elrond, that he has become something much greater, and who ever thought he could do this?
Okay.
Last sentence. There's a deep lesson for all of us about what we can become if we let imagination and magic be our source of freedom.
Okay. We have to
We're
going to make a new rule. If I put my hand up like this, we've got to stop because there's a time period here. And Matt has been trying to say something for a while.
I can catch up. I made some notes, so let me get.
I'm going to give you a little. I'm going to give you a little extra time here.
Fine.
I'm done. You don't need to.
No, you're.
No, I
mean
that we have a minute left, but I'm going to give Matt a little bit more than a minute.
Okay. So, I was just going to say that Tolkien's marriage views, are really this balance between Tom and Goldberry. I didn't get to finish that point, but I agree that that's actually what's going on. With regard to Tom and Frodo, it's very interesting. Frodo is, on the other hand, going back to what John said earlier about the narrative issues. Frodo is an author of the Red Book of Westmarch, yet it is he who is the first-hand witness, along with Tolkien narrative, that it's raining outside, heavily raining outside, and Tom goes outside and comes back in dry. And that's some weird power right there. Anybody who's curious about how powerful Tom Bombadil is in that act itself. And
he can dodge the rain.
Oh, sure. Right, he did.
Yeah.
I guess the point is pretty self-evident that when the author of the Red Book and Tolkien narrative both agree that Tom walks out in a downpour and comes back in dry, I don't know why anybody's not taking a hint from that, how powerful that is, but Gandalf can't even do that. Anyway, Huorns are inspirited, and Old Man Willow is obviously inspirited. There's a passage, there's not passages, but there's very good evidence in the nature of Middle Earth and in the Unfinished Tales.
There's a difference, though. There's a fundamental difference.
Yeah, it's age. But the Old Man Willow is is the oldest tree.
I'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, he is the oldest tree, and there's a lot of evidence that points towards the fact that the older you are, you are inspirited trees like Huorns that have become sedentary. And the older you are, the more sedentary you become. And in this particular case, Old Man Willow is the most sedentary, and he is the oldest. But he is still very similar in some ways in inspirited nature as a Huorn, because we know Huorns are obviously inspirited,
okay,
and so are Ents.
That's not the
that
difference.
Was my catch-up.
Okay, so when I said there's a major difference, and you said it's age, it's
I
not.
I didn't say it was the difference. I said it's a difference.
Well, that's not at all what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is with the Huorns and with the Ents as well, the way that it was described in the Silmarillion is spirits coming from afar and being drawn into the Elvar and Kelvar, which is the Elvish way of saying flora and fauna. They are designed. They are supposed to be. They are trees, and they are spirited, as you said, but they are designed to be that way by Iluvatar himself. Whereas this vision of what Old Man Willow may have been, according to, admittedly, an early draft of The Lord of the Rings from The Return of the Shadow, was a spirit trapped. And there's a difference because it almost becomes necromancy at that point.
Tom Bombadil is not related to any necromancy.
I didn't say that he did it. I said that it's a, like as to who trapped it in there, he's a possibility. But the idea of a
hold on, I don't.
The idea of it being inspirited.
You're going kind of too fast for what I'm saying. What I'm saying is,
you're not letting me finish. I'm saying that there's a difference between being
I'm still trying to make my first point.
No,
I'm
you're
trying
to. We've been out of time. I'm just trying to say that there's a difference between being inspirited and being a spirit that's trapped in something.
I agree that he was entrapped, just like Sauron was entrapped, just like Morgoth was entrapped. I think they wanted to take a physical form. They became part of those things, Huorns and beings, and found themselves trapped, but nobody trapped them. And so I think what you're saying is correct. I think the inspiriting nature is definitely correct. But I think they became trapped in those forms and dissipated in some of their power that didn't allow them to leave those forms, those physical forms anymore. You and I basically agree. We're agreeing
not.
Basically.
No,
we're saying these spirits are in these trees, and where they came from, which was Eru, into Middle Earth, is all correct. I agree with that too. I hadn't got to the point of agreeing with you yet because I wasn't able to finish, but you are correct. That's where they did come from, and some of them are older than others, and Old Man Willow is definitely the oldest.
But I don't agree with what you're saying, though. You're saying that we agree, but we don't agree. I don't see where we are agreeing. I'm saying that he's not a horn, that he's something completely different. That's the point.
What? I'm not saying he is a horn. I'm saying he's a very old and spirited, and the oldest inspirited tree that is similar to horns that are also inspirited.
I don't see where you get. I don't see where you get that he's the oldest.
It says very clearly that he is the oldest.
He's the oldest.
He's the oldest tree in the forest.
He's in that forest.
And
in that forest.
He's the oldest tree in Middle Earth, I think, also according to Treebeard.
Treebeard never mentioned Old Man Willow.
He is the oldest.
He only knew of Old Man Willow because Merry and Pippin told him the story, and he didn't make any comments. He thought it was interesting.
Well, maybe Sid recalls whether there's a passage that says that Old Man Willow is the oldest tree in Middle Earth.
I believe that Treebeard himself says he's closer to being the oldest.
I don't know that he even spoke of him.
Treebeard.
Yeah, Treebeard is one of the oldest creatures in Middle Earth. Even Celeborn called him eldest.
And
the eldest
and nobody says anything like that about Old Man Willow. Now
Yeah.
I will want to read the passage you mentioned, John. Sadly, I'm saddened tonight because I had always thought of Old Man Willow as a horn. And I think literarily, it's a hint of what's to come. There will be trees that do things and do nasty things. And this goes back to where I ended before, and you agreed, John, that everything that happens in the Old Forest is a condensation or a microcosm of the entire journey of the Lord of the Rings.
I agree with that fully, and I just checked my searchable PDF copy of The Lord of the Rings. Old Man Willow is not mentioned at any point by Treebeard. The last time that he's mentioned is in the Fellowship of the Ring. He's not mentioned again after that.
Thank you.
It's Tom. Maybe it's Tom that says he's the oldest.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's see. I'll bring it up here. Because there's not that many instances of Old Man Willow here.
How we want to use our last minutes.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, we've been out of time. We might as well.
I kind of get the catch up a little bit because I waited a long time to raise these points. But I will just say one last thing about horns real quick. They do get sedentary. There are passages that say they get older and more still and more sedentary the older they get.
Oh, I fully agree with that. I just don't think that he is a horn. So the Old Man Willow was mentioned 6 times in The Lord of the Rings. Not really 5 times because I'm not counting the index. 3 of them are in the passage that Sid read earlier, where it's Tom yelling at him. Then he's mentioned in one of Bombadil's songs, which is just, "Now I shall be passing Old Man Willow's house this side of springtime, not till the merry spring when the river daughter," blah, 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 it goes on like that. And then after that, they said that he just brought it up in discussion during the dinner. It just says, "Moving constantly in and out of his talk was Old Man Willow, and Frodo learned now enough to content him, indeed more than enough, for it was not comfortable lore." Tom's words laid bare the hearts of trees and their thoughts, which were often dark and strange, and filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, burning, destroyers, and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of vast forgotten woods, and in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. So they're just saying that the forest itself is incredibly old. They're not mentioning Old Man Willow as being the oldest tree or as being particularly old.
Well,
I think
that's fine.
He's kind of among them, but I agree with you, John. I would also say now, nothing could be clearer that this then references both Yavanna and her reason for creating the Ents, and also everything that happens when the Ents go to war and the Horns awaken and walk for the first time in Lord knows how long to go to war. There's some passages that had to have been rewritten after the Lord of the Rings was done to create foreshadowings.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is clearly one of them.
Yeah, I mean,
that gets us to one.
Go ahead, Matt.
So one last thing. One last thing about that. No one's ever really talked about it very much. In fact, it might have to be in our book. The idea that Huorns and Ents, because they were in Fanghorn, they had to have been in the Old Forest, and they had to have been in Doriath.
We know that there were 100% there were Ents and Huorns in Doriath because they Beren led an army of them to attack the dwarves. That is, we know that they were. And as for the Old Forest, probably they were even in the Shire because in the very, very beginning, one of the very first speaking parts, I think it's the first conversation to happen in The Lord of the Rings, is a group of old hobbits talking about some rumors and reports of weird things going on, and one of them was trees moving around.
Yeah. A tall elm walking on the north down.
Yes.
What's interesting to me about that
is the only reference to North Farthing in the entire Lord of the Rings.
What's interesting to me about that, whether this leads to the next section or not, is Melian the Maya and Melian's girdle being such a large swath of a very old forest, which is Doriath, which is about 150 miles wide and about 125 miles north to south.
Here he goes with the measurements.
Well, it's because that's what the maps say.
I know.
That's what the maps drew. Trying to get people's mind around the idea how big this forest is. It's very big and very old, and with Melian's girdle all around it, can you imagine how powerful the Ents and Huorns were as a part of that unified defensive structure in Doriath? I mean, it must have been. I mean, you got Melian's girdle, but you've also got these kind of forces that are inside, not counting the elves. Yeah. But that's just something to think about. It's pretty amazing.
And I think it's important to say these are connected because both the Old Forest and Fangorn Forest are described as remnants of one great forest that filled the whole land, implying that, I mean, I accept that Old Man Willow is not a Horn, but it was logical for me as a kid to think he was.
I think he isn't. I'm not 100% on that.
Yeah, but my point is just, at some point, Bombadil stayed and the Old Forest stayed, Treebeard and his folks stayed, and Fangorn stayed, and all the rest was, as Yavanna foresaw, torn down by the depredations of men and dwarfs.
And Sauron as well.
Yeah.
A lot of the forest was destroyed specifically by Sauron.
Well, and the Brownlands, east of the Anduin, very specifically, and that's how the Entwise were lost.
And Numenor as well. They were coming to Middle Earth and deforesting it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to wrap it up, gentlemen. We've gone way over time in this final section. So going into, let's start with final thoughts on this. Matt, you first. Final thoughts on this last section.
I think there's I think it was pretty productive. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that anybody said. I mean, we're looking at it from different angles, but even on this last section, you think we don't agree, but I think we like 98% agree. Just looking at two different things related to the definition of a Huorn, and all I'm saying is that Huorns and Old Man Willow are inspirited. That's all I'm saying. The But outside of that, I think that's all what it means, and I think it was a good section. I agree with everything you guys said.
All right. For me, I would just say that, my whole thing about the inspirited is because I don't think that Old Man Willow is inspirited. I think for something to be inspirited, it is by design. And I think that just having a spirit trapped inside of a tree is different from a tree that has a spirit, because I think trees already have spirits. Even the regular, ordinary trees that are not Huorns. The definition of a Huorn is not an inspirited tree. The definition of a Huorn, from what Treebird said, is it is a tree that has become entish. That is what a Huorn is. Sid?
Agreed, and let's be clear, Tolkien himself said once that he wished he could hear all the trees talking. He felt there's some meaningful spirit in each and every tree, and probably a few foxes as well.
And wait, I didn't even think of it. Rocks, according to Legolas. Stones have voices.
Yes, and don't forget
in the atomistic sense of metaphysics, rocks are a atomistic being in the universe. It's really fancy talk, but I mean that's really what Tolkien is getting at in general, that everything is alive in the universe, and that's all true. Maybe I don't mean spirited, but as far as Huorns are concerned, but they're animated.
And they're certainly animated. That's for sure.
Well, there's something in there that's living and understands when Tom Bombadil is singing to them. Is my point. And they move. They can move and they do things. So they have some kind of a thinking being, spirit to them, small s if you want to.
I think anyway, the word we're looking for is sapient.
Well, right? Sure. But I mean,
they're aware of their surroundings.
Is it time?
Sure, but there's something ticking in them.
It is, yes.
There's something ticking in them that makes them respond to music, attack, or thank.
Okay.
There's something in there that they actually know what they're doing.
We got to stop. We're well past final thoughts. So, Sid.
Very last thought, and John, please add this to the notes. If you want to hear my view of what ultimately happened to the Entwives, and it is a happy tale, please go to Archive of Our Own, also known as AO3, where I publish my fanfic, and read The Return of the Entwives. And that also captures a true fact that Tolkien probably didn't know, but would have loved about Oxford. There's also a story called The Grief of Elrond that touches on some of these deep, deep themes of the lasting wisdom and love of Middle-earth into our day.
Okay, and to just wrap up the stream, you can view us all on Quora. Me and Sid are under our regular names. Matt is Lore Master, all one word. Of course, there will be links in the description of the video, but for those of you watching us live, make sure that Lore Master does not have a space in it. Otherwise, that's some other guy. And actually, speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, Matt, has there been any sort of progress on getting rid of that guy there that's pretending to be you?
Yeah, the Quora reached out saying they're reviewing getting it taken down. But yeah, it's Lore Master, no space, capital L, capital M. Oh, and one thing good for the order from earlier, it was Fingon. It was Fingon.
Fingon was the one that was crushed by the Balrogs. Yes, they mashed him to bits.
Yep. He was crushed by both of them into basically a bloody paste on the ground. Yes, that's correct.
They smote him into nothing, and then they trod in his remains. It was Fingon. Okay. All right. I knew it was one of the important elves.
Can't we end on a happy note?
What about Fingon getting? Well, not about Gondolin, right? Tuor got to go to the west. That's the happy ending, right?
I wrote an article recently on Quora. I wrote an article on Quora that's called "What Would Morgoth Do If He Found the Flame Imperishable?" It's a pretty good article. It's pretty deep, and what his confusions and blockages and what it's like to be a being like that who is almost borderline, well, really is nihilistic in one sense. But anyway, it's a very good article. It's got a good curve and return on it. So that's one thing that just came out that's interesting.
And loremaster.com, don't forget that.
Yeah, our website for the 9 is lore-master.com. And it's not just about me. It's about Lore Masters. It's all of us.
It's mostly about Matt.
Well, it's only because I made the website.
I'm just teasing
it's really it's our landing page for our group now, which is kind of cool. We all go by on the 9. We all have designations of LM1 and LM2, LM6. All this kind of thing, just to make it brief for us to talk to one another. But anyway. It's been a lot of fun, and this has been a great show. Thanks again, John and Sid, for joining.
No problem.
John here on this great site.
Okay, and we're going to go over the schedule that we normally have for everybody that's watching live on Twitch of my regular schedule of gaming streams. So just give me a minute to come over here to my regular thing. So tomorrow afternoon I will be live, and we're going to be playing a bit more of, and possibly the end of Gurum and a Monstrous Adventure. Probably be finishing it. It's a little bit longer than I expected. Very fun game. That's tomorrow afternoon. Saturday night we'll be returning with more of Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U. Sunday night, we're going to be starting Castlevania Curse of Darkness, and that's going to be on the PlayStation 2. Monday afternoon, I don't have the scene set up fully, but we're going to be doing the last bit of Street Fighter EX3, which was better than I thought it was going to be. And we'll be starting on Street Fighter Alpha 3 as well. Tuesday night, we'll be continuing along with Eterna Noctis for Steam. Wednesday afternoon, we have more of Wario Land 3 for the Game Boy Color. And then Thursday, a week from today, I'll let you guys know. We might be doing some YouTube recordings. I might be reading The Hobbit, or maybe something else entirely. So it's going to be, Thursdays are going to be sort of like fun, up in the air, a lot of podcasts and stuff. So anyway, let's come over to here and see who we have online that we could raid. If it's possible to raid Corey Olsen, we will, because he's the only other person on Twitch that I know that covers Tolkien. Unfortunately, he's not currently live. I guess we'll raid my friend Zophar here. So we're gonna stop the recording here, but we're gonna do a raid.